Susan Sontag's on photography. It's a highly recommended book that I saw kind of up there in her list of more essay kind of inquiries. And this, I've only read one other Susan Sontag book. I believe it's called the On the Suffering of Others or Regarding the Pain of Others, I believe, and which I really liked as well because it was shortly after 9/11, and this is like later in Sontag's life. She must have been, or at least in her 60s at the time, and yeah, after looking back in hindsight, and then seeing, and talking about how the suffering of others is like how do you deal with that? Like how do you deal with a world of other people? Like even if your life it seems like it's horrible, like you hear about like maybe Africa or South Africa or like the violent turmoil and upheaval, political and social, and just on an existential level of like if and how do you deal with that, and yeah, she talks about different things, and I think a similar thing is like I don't know if she mentioned this in that it does, I think it's George Bataille. He wrote the Eye, I like the story of the Eye, and not really a big on that. So I'm not sure if I'd want to reread that anytime soon. At least I have to make sure I'm in a good headspace because I'm pretty notoriously like thin-skinned when it comes to like reading about blood and stuff like that, or reading about very graphically detailed stuff. But yeah, he did have a essay. I haven't read his essays yet. Um, but I heard that he talked about this man that he kept a photograph of a Chinese man, or maybe it was a Japanese. I think it was maybe Japanese. And there's this, infamously graphic photograph of having, of being, I think it's called a death by a thousand cuts or something. And it's like, this guy's getting cut incrementally, or, at pretty much all the same, I think, kind of severity, and it's incision marks on him, and it's like one by one. It's like until he's like bleeds to death, and it's just like the worst way to die. Um, and it just like yeah, that kind of pain, and then I think Bataille was saying that he kept a photograph of that just to kind of remind him of how bad things can get, and it's like, and I think I identify with that. As weird as that sounds, I think to be memento mori, to think about death. Excuse me, my you know foot itches for some reason. Okay, but yeah, it's a memento mori type of thing. You be cognizant, and you're aware that death is a major certainty. It's like the only thing that we actually know is like nothingness, right? It's ontology. There's us, and then we live, and then we die someday. We have to kind of come face to face with that. So yeah, in a sense, like I like to think about whenever I'm going through tough times. I'll think about Solzhenitsyn's, and the people, not only what he went through, but the people that he knew what went through in the gulags, and or just various things like the rape of Nanking. Like how by Iris Chang, where she um, like just like investigates thoroughly into what happened. It's just a strict, what happened to why the Japanese, what they did to the Chinese city of Nanking. Just like the extent, the true like extent that they want, But anyway, back to Sontag. So this, my second Sontag, I like the way she thinks. She's done a very thoroughly, like very, um, like mammothly like exhaustive research, and I envy like her, um, her like cleverness and wit, but it's not misplaced. It's not like every word seems to be have has economy. I guess there's, but she separates this, I believe, into like five chapters, and like it starts off right off in the bat with called In Plato's Cave, and she talks about how humanity is, quote, I believe, is unregeneratively lingers in Plato's cave. Meaning, I think, from what that in the cave, it's reliving. So she says, still reveling in its age-old habit and mere images of the truth. But being educated by photographs is not like being educated by older, more artisanal images. For one thing, there are many more images around claiming our attention. So yeah, that's This was written in 1977, by the way. So this is Sontag kind of in the midst, kind of at least seeing like the last decade or two or three, I guess, of, um, like of just kind of various kind of photographs and how that photography has evolved so much for like cause, she does go back to the history of it, the inception of photography back with I believe is Napis. I think it was a French man. I actually remember just on my own accord learning this, not to toot my own horn. I mean, it's just a fact, common fact, but just being kind of interested, like reading about like Edvard Muybridge and like the horse in motion. I was like actually kind of fascinated by that when I was younger because the idea that you can just you know put imitate time flowing, or you can imitate time. You can take still photographs and at every incremental point in time, and then extrapolate it into a full cohesive thing, and that was fascinating to me. So that, and then I just kind of looked a little bit back into like the history of photography and the fact that like it was like Napis, I think, with his first kind of it was like a kind of, what do you call it, a nitric, not an, I don't know if it was nitric acid, it was some kind of chemical admixture of something that you would put in. It was on a plate. It was on a plate that you would let exposed there. It was a very early darkroom, very primitive, and it was just a very, you can see it. Look it up. You can see it's like the view from I think somewhere. I don't know if it was it Paris. Like view down and from across the houses and different things, and it's like very just very primal, incipient, and like there's no, it's very yeah, like it's you wouldn't guess that it's where that is because it's like so obfuscated, but and it's the reason it's called a camera obscura because that actually through tricking you with light, people have kind of figured out how, excuse me, kind of how to focus light into a pinhole, or like a pinhole kind of thing, like the camera. And it wouldn't, like, they didn't know how to record, but they knew how to, the ancients, I don't know how far back this goes, probably a while back, maybe as far back as maybe Roman times. I'm probably butchering that, but yeah, they would be able to kind of temporarily just put like an image reflected back, and in the same way that maybe a single lens reflex does, except more primitively, and then they'd reflect it back, and for an ephemeral little image that they'd be able to see, but it wouldn't like, it would just go away as soon as you were done with it. Like it wouldn't, you wouldn't be able to record and that still image. But they probably tried to figure it out even then. But yeah, it's just like an interesting thing that like photography, in a sense, like if you're thinking like platonically, going back to that with forms, it's almost like, in a sense, like music has always been around. It predates, if you think. I mean, this is maybe me trying to sound deep in one sense, but it's like the idea of an octave being a 2 to 4 ratio, 4 to 1 ratio, 4 to 1 ratio, I believe. Like this idea of like an octave is a frequency. It's like a perfect bum 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 bum. It's like there's no way. Just like in geometry with similar shapes, it's like these things have existed in some perfect form predating us, and I think, but I don't have much to back that up. I can't really. But anyway, going back to Sontag, I like the way she talked about Plato, using him as the cave. Anybody who knows, I guess, the first thing about like kind of Western or continental philosophy, or even just like not even that, but just like the ancient Greeks in general, was that the cave was a almost a parable in a sense, almost just a tale about like kind of a what if kind of thought experiment, about a group of people that are the only thing they know is this cave. They're blinded and they don't know what light is, and like any amount of light will like suddenly, any amount of exposure will obviously blind them, because it's like all they know is being accustomed to and inculcated in this world of darkness, and everything that they see too is fabricated images. Like they see shadows on the wall, like puppetry, like kind of a kabuki theater, I guess, before that, and they can't see anything else except for what is proposed and like put out, like what is put out there by others, like other people are, synthetically giving them this existence for them. It's something that's put on later. It's like something that's a posteriori, like they are. But the a priori truth for them is that they, if they keep if they keep egging at it and they keep eking away, or at what's going on and teasing out possibilities, they can actually find out that a or one number one, the those all those shadow puppetry, that is false. That is a false kind of fabrication, and they can move beyond that, and that too out in the once they slightly accustom themselves, because like one of them does find their way out, and he's able to like kind of slowly adjust to the light and slowly see again, and he's able to be like, whoa, this is way much better than this reality, this false kind of reality that I had before, because it's actually better than, it's truer than true, I guess, in a Baudelaire type of sense, like realer than real, like I'd rather have this than that. So as one by one he tries to convince them, but like a good amount of them, it's that kind of classic kind of thing with like the truth. Once you find the truth, it's like hard to get everybody else on board. So he's like, I don't know if he does get any of them, but I think generally that's kind of the gist of it. But anyway, so the Platonic truth of the matter, and like that's something that I like about what Sontag was saying, was like this idea that images are kind of like truth in a sense. Some people use photography to kind of investigate the truth, but other times it's used to kind of, in some ways, it can be a little bit too much, like going back to the pain of others, like there's a aspect of stuff where going out with photography, and like she was talking about like how there was like a kind of I don't know what you call it, almost an innuendo in some sense, of like the gun being like a or the camera being like a gun, or vice versa, and that going out there, and with you're taking photographs, but you're really kind of using it, you're weaponizing it, and that she was like saying that, but like she was also saying in a literal sense that most like photographers don't really have to deal with the kind of life-threatening kind of thing that like an actual gun does. Like the gun kind of predisposes or offers this new kind of utility, one up on everybody else, where their life is kind of in your hands, and whereas in the I think she was arguing that with like the camera, that's not really the case. It's more of like in a very kind of metaphorical sense. And she talks about like like war journalists, though, like going out there and taking being in the thick of war, and seeing like Kevin Carter with like the seeing the African children, or like out starving, I believe, in South Africa, and he was haunted by that, because of the fact that because the prevalence of how that was on Life magazine, I believe, right? And that was like it put like a number on his life, and he actually committed suicide due to that kind of pain, that like he was he couldn't escape it, like he was having nightmares, he couldn't sleep, couldn't pay the rent, and finally he just he just couldn't take it anymore. But yeah, there was the image of the the starving child, and he got like a lot of flack for not helping the starving child, but actually he was instructed not to help them. So there's like a big thing with Sontag, even before this is 20, almost what maybe 20 almost 15 at least years before that, kind of the 90s, and how like if you're you have a very tough you have a tough calling if you're in there to investigate and take pictures, and and then in that sense she was saying that photographers were almost like perverts in a way, like almost voyeuristic, because you're like going in, you're taking still images and of otherwise people that don't know that you're there. In some senses, she talked a lot about Diane Arbus, sorry, and how she described herself, I think, as almost being a bit of a voyeur. I think she felt like she was like somewhat because she identified the most with the freaks, and this, Sontag's work actually prompted me to kind of look a lot more into Arbus's work and how prolific she was, and how she was able to point out and like find out the isolated, and she was drawn to the kind of not the just the eerie, but like the like unsung kind of the people like the un what do you call this, the unlovables, the undesirables, like people that they would have been like maybe the lepers of Jesus's time, or in the back in the Roman Empire, I guess, like the people in you might call them circus freaks. Some people call them circus freaks. I do think like the term freaks is a demeaning term, and even back with Todd, what was it, Todd Browning's film, it was called Freaks, and surprisingly enough, it was about people that were odd. There were one guy named Schlitzie, a man that kind of looked like a woman, because he had like this very kind of shrunken kind of head. People, they have it's these shrunken kind of features, and these are very like physical deformities that people have, and people take advantage of that, and they put them in this kind of objectifying them into a state of for just capitalist intrigue and for their own machinations of like how much money can we make, because that was a big thing in circus times, like as Barnum. I don't know too much about the man himself, but P.T. Barnum, and there's Barnum and Bailey, I think. Yeah, they thrived off of just kind of taking advantage and like using these poor people that had no other way. Like Otto, I think his name was Otto Vanga, I think, was the African pygmy, and that people are actually talking about how he was almost using him as like a weird kind of evolutionary. I can't remember what exactly they did. He was in the circus because he was a pygmy African, from a pygmy tribe, and he was, and they pretty much kind of, I think he ended up committing suicide, sadly enough, when he was in his 30s. But I think it's been a while since I've read up on him. But yeah, he was basically pushed in a scenario where he couldn't do anything else, because once you're in this kind of the game, like the heartless kind of cold game of circus performance, you just like Kafka said, with the hunger artist, it's like the hunger artist has no other calling. It's completely and it's explicit. It's completely the only thing he has is like I have to, and the fact that like the whole time like he was in bad faith doing that hunger artist, because he was actually it was just the fact that he couldn't find anything desirable to eat that he did that. So it was like kind of he was what you would say like dishonest, I guess. But he was a kind of tragic kind of hero in that sense, because it's like you felt kind of bad for him, like putting his heart in there, and people didn't care. All they cared about was the panther at the end, right? So yeah, this kind of thing, it's like it's very true. I think Kafka goes on to something with the circus, this idea that people want something, people don't want to. It's there's a weird thing with freaks, as people would say, that almost people want to see them, but at a distance. They're like, we want to see these, midgets and like these giants and stuff, but it's like we don't want to break bread with them like Jesus did. So in that sense, we want to like kind of just like kind of mock them and laugh at them, and or maybe feel better about ourselves because we have nothing better to do. And that you see that today. That's like our human nature. People don't care. Like people see people online, or see people like who are peculiar looking, or like maybe somebody with bad proportion, or with ill proportioned kind of features, and it's like they're just kind of, they're given a platform, and they're given you know they're given, let's say, like with the what's the name of the kid, with the big neck, the long neck, daddy long neck. It's just like, hey, he looks weird, we get it, he has, and it's no fault of his own, but at the same time, it's like you're giving these people a platform into putting them out there and memeing them, I guess, in the name of memeing, and it's still kind of the same kind of dynamics of like circus performers. It's like they're not they're there because it's artificial, facile, the very surface layer of what they have to offer. Like they have, these are people with souls, and they have, and like they're not giving them a chance to kind of like prove that. So anyway, but going back to Sontag, yeah, this but yeah, Arbus too. That's why she devoted quite a big amount of time to Arbus, because she of just how um like esteemed she was even during her time. But Arbus was also troubled as well, and she struggled with depression. And I'm not sure how much of it was just by the fact that she was around these kind of people, that she was wanted to. And I did hear her daughter, I think, did like a recording, because there are actually, I think there's no recordings of Diane Arbus available. I think so. I think it was her sister or her daughter who did a recording, but like was talking about how some photographers, like say Richard Avedon, who had a fashion era, but he also did some kind of things where he would take very intimate portraits of celebrities, otherwise kind of these big people, like folk heroes maybe. I don't know if he did Bob Dylan, but I think he did like Lou Reed, or like these other people, all the way up until like the early 2000s when he passed away. And yeah, but yeah, he would do them in a way that made them very, very human. Like he would take pictures of um otherwise these big like rock star kind of people, like maybe, I don't know, Iggy Pop. I'm not sure if he did Iggy Pop, but he would take them in such a way that Iggy Pop would look um like human, very just on, just like as in very casual situations, that that with minimal add on, with aperture, with what do you call it, appurtenances, like accessories, minimal kind of tacking on, just bare bones minimalism. So I think that's what he did later on, but he was also a pretty big fashion photographer as well. And yeah, Arbus too, she was more so with she talked about, I think Avedon wanted to, I'm just kind of or comparing their contrasting their styles and the way they would kind of meet their subjects, if you will. And I think Arbus didn't really. I think she said she felt bad, but she said she didn't really talk to the people like that. She really, I think she tried to make them feel comfortable, and she tried to make it seem like she wasn't there to like take it around. And then sometimes she would be spending, there would be the awkward half hour, 45 minutes that she would be waiting for these other, to get a family portrait together, and she was waiting for like, okay, we have to wait for the little brother and the father to come home, so we have to make that awkward time. Um, but yeah, and then with Avedon, he wanted to make sure that his portrait, like he wanted to make sure that they felt comfortable, like they were family, like they would shoot the crap, or like talk about whatever for a good amount of time to get them comfortable. So but yeah, there was I think like Arbus was especially big in the sense that took she I actually saw some was like she would take pictures of nudist colonies, like nudist camps, and like would they just, this is what stuff was happening in the 60s, because she died, I believe, in the mid 7 or early 70s. And she would take pictures of very just kind of vulnerable, just portraits of like nudist in their kind of in their habitat, I guess. And it was it's something that people wouldn't really think about until like maybe 20 years after her. She was like seeking out these people that were strange, and like maybe people didn't want to interact with on a daily basis. And like I remember coming across that actually in this book. It's a photography book actually, when I was like I want to say like 11 or 12, and it was called Century, I think. And it's like this big thick book. It's basically going through the 100 years from 1900 to 2000. It's called a coffee table book, so it's like something, but I wouldn't necessarily put that on a coffee table just because of the nudity in it. I mean, it's not like right off the bat, but there is like like the nudist colony I mentioned. Arbus's portrait, I came across that, and I was like, so I guess I did have some implied kind of awareness of her work, but I didn't know she was the one that took those pictures. But yeah, it's like a married couple in a nudist camp, and they were just like that kind of stuff. And like, there's different kind of things, and that one too had kind of similar kind of like just horrific Japanese executions and stuff. Another reason you wouldn't want to put that out in a public space. But yeah, I guess they do have content warnings on it. So, but anyway, yeah, this is like just a kind of thing of like how photography can get, and which brings me to another man by the name of Roger Ballon, I believe. He's still alive, I think. And he took a lot of photographs throughout the 1980s and 90s, and one of them, I believe, he took in 1990 of the infamous one of the twins, the very, very inbred twins. I think you can look them up. You can probably understand. Like they had like really big, like thick set features, and there was like kind of a slobbering, and they had very kind of like almost pointed heads, and then down, and it's hard to describe, but if you've probably seen them, I think, if you just look up, and again, it sounds like kind of denigrating like inbred twins, but if you and I thought for the longest time that photograph was of like an American South, like something in my neighborhood, I guess. If you go a few hours away from my place into odd West Virginia, I think, which I think is the YouTuber Soft White Underbelly, he did like a portrait thing of that, which kind of reminded me of a bit of the Roger Ballon thing of I think they're called the Whitakers. Yeah, the Whitaker family. And yeah, I have to take these kind of things in kind of small doses, but it is the kind of thing where, hence why he named the channel that. Mark Leda, I think he called it Soft White Underbelly, for obvious reasons, because these are the kind of things that are underneath the kind of surface that are, you might think is fringe, but they're just prevalent enough that you might know of somebody like this. And I do, and I've never met somebody like this, as like the Whitakers, ever. But if they are out there, and if I wanted to, and I don't want to, and he did ask nicely that people leave them alone, like just let them have their, just let them live their lives. And but in a hypothetical manner, it's like they are only a few hours away, so it's like one of those kind of, I don't know, but yeah, like that, Roger Ballon took these photos of these inbred twins just to kind of show what was going on in apartheid South Africa. So it wasn't in America at all. It was actually South Africa. I'm not sure aware of the town's name, but it was like a little community, kind of town, village that was very old-fashioned and on the fringe, kind of on the fringe and stuff, even for South Africa. So it was like these two guys that were probably like maybe in their 20s, 30s, I guess. Yeah, that was quite, something that I didn't expect, because I thought there was going to be something like in the American South. But anyway, so going back on, there's some really good quotes that she talks about in photography. But going back to that topic of photography being kind of inherently voyeuristic, she said, to photograph people is to violate them, by seeing them as they never see themselves, by having knowledge of them that they can never have. It turns people into an object that can't be symbolically possessed, just a camera in a sublimation of the gun. To photograph somebody is just a subliminal murder, a soft murder, an appropriate, sad, frightened time. Photographs are a way of imprisoning reality. One can't possess reality. One can possess images. One can't possess that present, but can possess the past. An interesting thing about how photographs kind of encage, I guess, reality in a way that it takes a snapshot, and it's like everything. It's in a way that I think she did use that kind of realer than real description of talking about how, even though your own eyesight and the way that you remember events, and like that's why there's a kind of a weird phenomenon that we all notice, I'm sure, of recording yourself or in any way, namely with audio recorder. This is a personal bug for me, something that I've noticed with more so with audio, but it's audio visual, obviously, kind of thing where you kind of look back on what you recorded, and it's like totally not the way you imagine sounding in the moment. Like you find, I thought I had a more bassy voice, or I thought I had a different timbre or whatever, timbre. And it's one of those things where, like, for me, especially with like watching myself back on video and stuff, the rare moments I do, because I usually don't really watch all the whole of, I'm not, I doubt, unless it's like for maybe, I guess, like, I guess self evaluation purposes. It gets kind of, it sounds like kind of like more of a, like, for lack of a better word, just kind of masturbatory, kind of like just like listening back on what something I said. But at the same time, I don't know, like, I think looking on the times that I do, I realize, like, whoa, I don't remember sounding like this, or like taking this long to get a sentence out. So in a sense, like, photography does that too, where it's like you're taking a still image that's actually better than how you remember it, I think. That's what Solntech said. But anyway, and yeah, she also has a kind of a list of quotes at the end relating to photography, and some of them are like advertisements talking about how like pioneering these new, a Nikon camera that came out maybe in the 50s or something, and like how pioneering that was. Like, just one shot, that's it. You don't have to, you know it comes right out. You don't have to like go down to the dark room and all this kind of. But yeah, there's also, yeah, she talked about, one of the memorable ones was about Kafka getting photographed, and I have to keep reminding myself that Kafka lived, obviously, right around that time, because it feels like longer ago for some reason. But he was 1880s to 1920, I believe, about 1924, I think, and he was photographed a decent amount of times in his life, and then he was saying to one of his to the photographers that, I think he said something like, it's like the Oracle at Delphi, or something like, to know thyself is like one of the things I think that is said on the temple, which isn't around anymore. It's like, it's obviously, subject to time and change and all that. It's like been completely obliterated since then. But he was talking about quoting that passage of, it's like, dare to know, or in everything in excess. I think know thyself in everything in excess. I think that's what it was. And everything not in excess, I think, in moderation, I think. So but yeah, so I think he was saying that, like, I might have actually be able to find it, but yeah, he was saying that, like, the camera was kind of knew him in a way that he didn't, or like the camera had something inkling into his soul that he couldn't garner quite, and that he was like a little bit scared of it, and that the photographer was like, made a joke about it. It was very Kafka-esque, obviously, because it's but no, I don't know if I can find. If I'm just wasting your time or not. But I think it came from a book about like photographing Kafka. But yeah, I think Baudelaire. But there was also an interesting thing on Avedon said, I think, just to go back to him, he was saying that, I always prefer to work in a studio. It isolates people from their environment. They become, in a sense, symbolic of themselves. I often feel that people come to me to be photographed as they would go to a doctor or a fortune teller to find out how they are. So they're dependent on me. I have to engage them. Otherwise, there's nothing to photograph. The concentration of has to come from me and involve them. Sometimes the force of it goes so strong that in the studio it goes unheard. The sounds in the studio go unheard. Time stops. We share a brief, intense intimacy, but it's unearned. Yeah, it's interesting that he says it's unearned, because it's like, sometimes it's like you see these people and it's like you're saying goodbye to them in a sense at the same time. Yeah, it's something I think Baudelaire was, I think, skeptical of it. He was saying that then, as in, I think, the poet Charles Baudelaire, he was saying that photography and the art are the same thing. That the moment our squalid society rushed narcissists demand to man to gaze at a trivial image on a scrap of metal, some democratic writer ought to have seen here the cheap method of disseminating and loathing history for painting. Yeah, so that he was just kind of comparing photography, kind of that it was better than, or it wasn't better than the visual arts at the time. So anyway, that is all I have for today on photography by Susan Sontag. So thanks for watching.